Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good day, good evening, wherever you are. All of you are budding writers or accomplished writers. We are having a really healthy group. Thank you for coming in to share the time. So, Alison Goldstein is going to talk about a really interesting subject, how to publish your own book. And this event is brought to you by the New York Metro Women. And I'll say a little about this group. It is the first of its kind. The alumni organized this voluntary group to have the goal of women helping women. And it is so successful that the University of Rochester, it inspired them to create an official group called the Global Women's Network. So we are based in New York City, and we are so thankful for this technology of Zoom so everybody can join us. I would like to introduce Alison. She has been working with writers as early as her time when she was at the University of Rochester. She was what you call it, a writing fellow tutor. And after she graduated in 2008, she came to New York City and worked in the publishing area. And now she has her own company. Amazing. And I just want to let you know, look, it's called A Gold Standard. Isn't it wonderful? She's just got this ability to use words, Alison Goldstein, right? A gold standard. I love it. And besides writing her own book, which she just published, Run Healthy, you can find it in the recent Rochester Bus issue. She helps to coach other writers finish their book. She also ghostwrites for very busy executives. And at the same time, if your company, your organization needs help with branding, she comes up with all these wonderful ideas to help brand your company. So I think you don't want to hear me yatter on anymore. Therefore, Alison, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Shirley. That's really kind of you. I'm really happy to be here. I'm appreciative and thank the New York Metro Women for the opportunity to do this and really the encouragement. I've given some semblance of this talk to many a client interested in otherwise. And so now I'm formalizing it at their request. So please be nice to me. This is my first time giving it formally. But I think you'll have a lot to learn. I had even more to say that I'm going to present here, but I elected to whittle it down so that there's lots of time for questions at the end, because I know when I attend these sorts of things, I always have questions. So we're here to talk about book publishing, which means that we need to actually ask the question, what is book publishing? You might think you know, and you probably do know a lot about it. It's the dissemination of written ideas. Basically, it's what happens after you're okay with your written manuscript. The other distinguishing factor is, that there's a lot of shorter versions of writing. You could read a magazine article, a newspaper, tweet, whatever. We're talking about book publishing here specifically, so that's a much longer idea. When you think of book publishing, you might think of a printed and bound book. It's certainly the kind that's been around the longest. But now book publishing also refers to ebook, audiobook. There's other mediums that you could use. And in fact, some books only come in those mediums. For example, the romance genre, readers of romance read them so rapidly that now with Kindle, they just can go through them much faster than getting them at their bookstore. And so a lot of romance books will only come out in ebook format. So that's always a consideration when you're book publishing medium, but we're going to talk about the actual route to publishing no matter what your medium is. So a question that you may not have asked yourself is, do you need to finish your book before you think about publishing? The quick answer for fiction and memoir is, okay. The quick answer if you're publishing fiction or memoir is you probably do need to finish your manuscript before you consider moving on to the publishing part of the process. In traditional publishing, which is what we're going to talk about very soon, It's required. You will need to have a manuscript to present to the entities that you want to convince to publish your book. Really, the only exceptions in this realm are if you're a celebrity, a publisher, or an agent might approach you. But if you're here, you're probably not a celebrity of that level. So apologies, but you will have to finish your manuscript. The nonfiction world is different. In nonfiction publishing, you don't really even want to have a manuscript ready before you're looking into book publishing if publishing, especially traditional publishing, is your main objective. You're going to need something called a book proposal, which in essence is kind of a sales pitch for the book you intend to write. So it would include a summary of the book, who you think will buy it, other books that are kind of in the same genre and category that you can compare yours to favorably, who you are, why you're the best person to write the book, a table of contents, and then your actual plan for the book. So that's a table of contents and a sample chapter, but again, not the whole manuscript. This is required in traditional publishing. This is what you will present to the entities we're going to talk about in order to get them to agree to publish your book. But even in self-publishing, which is towards the end of this presentation, it's really a useful step, and I encourage a lot of folks who are going to self-publish to create a book proposal prior to starting writing their manuscript, because it really helps focus your thoughts and create a real plan to write the book. So with that in mind, there are three primary publishing options when you start looking at how to get your book out into the world. They are traditional publishing, which is the most common view of publishing. It's been around the longest. When you think of publishing a book, this is probably what you're thinking about. That's why we're going to address it first. Then there's an option called hybrid publishing, which is, as the name implies, a cross between traditional publishing and self-publishing. And then there's self-publishing, which used to get a bad rap. It used to be referred to a lot of times as vanity publishing, which implies that the writer is vain to want their book published at all. But now it's, you can get a very high quality book out of self-publishing, and a lot of individuals, especially authors that prioritize speed of getting their book out, which includes people who own businesses and need it for marketing purposes, self-publishing is a really valuable option. So we're going to talk about that last. So this whole presentation is intended to help you decide between these three options when you're thinking of publishing your own book. The first and number one most important question that you need to ask when you're trying to decide which route you want to take in publishing your book is why you want to publish the book. This is a key decision in terms of making the best decision for you and for your book. And there are so many reasons a person might want to publish a book. Some people really want personal validation of outside entities and experts telling them that their ideas are valuable, that their book is really well written, and that's kind of a traditional publishing move. You might want to publish a book because you want your family to have all of your family stories in one place. You might want to publish a book because you need credibility in a certain field. You might publish a book because you want to use it as a marketing tool for your business. Any of these answers will guide the publishing decision that you make. So that's why this is the first question that you need to ask. That said, there are other considerations that will help determine which direction you want to go. And so for each of the three publishing options, we're going to talk about guarantees and gatekeeping. So what is the guarantee that your book will get published if you take this route, and who may or may not stand in your way? There's the issue of time. How quickly can you get an answer as to whether or not you do have a guarantee of book publishing, and how long is it going to actually take to get this thing out into the world? There's money on the front end and the back end. So what, if anything, do you need to invest in order to get the book published? And what do you stand to earn once the book is out in the world and people are buying it? And last, but certainly not least, there's creative control. How much control do you want to have over the final product that is produced? All right. So we're going to start with our first avenue of publishing, traditional publishing. Like I said, this is the oldest form. It's probably the form you're thinking of. Fun fact, the oldest publisher that's still operating is Cambridge University Press. It was founded by Henry VIII and printed its first book in 1584. So almost every book you read today for fun, especially in print, is probably produced by a trade publisher. Truly almost everything. Harry Potter, any New York Times bestseller, Stephen King, Obama memoirs, whatever you can think of, they've been produced by trade publishers. Names you might recognize if you look at this sort of thing. I know as a reader, not as a professional, but as a reader, I definitely don't tend to care who publishes my book. But if you do, big publishers that you might recognize are Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Scholastic. So just to give you an idea of who's out there. All right, so here is the roadmap to traditional publishing. It's different between fiction and nonfiction, so we're going to talk about fiction first. It starts with your manuscript, like I said earlier. Once you have your manuscript finished, you need to go get an agent to represent it. Your agent is the intermediary between you and your manuscript and the publisher that might buy and then produce your book. So you would submit your manuscript to an agent with a cover letter. You would want to find someone that represents books similar to what you've written. There's a lot to be said about agents, but that's kind of the first step. So good news, you have an agent. They probably are going to have some revisions they want you to make to your manuscript in order to make it more attractive to a publisher. So that's why we have a revision step in there. You'll work with them, or they could, in theory, hire an outside editor to help work on this. Not every agent will do that. Lots of agents will help you make the revisions themselves. But when they're happy with how your manuscript looks, they then reach out to their various publishing contacts and friends. They will have a relationship with these people, so they can kind of vouch based on their relationship. So let's say, oh, I have something that you really should look at. This book is really great. They submit it to the editor at the publishing house. That's what we're calling the publisher for all intents and purposes. They will do this to many different publishers, most likely. And eventually, let's say a publisher says, yes, we absolutely must publish this book. They offer you a contract. Now, here's the thing about the contract. So the contract offers you money, of course, in order to publish your book. There's something called an advance, which is the money you would get from the publisher on the front end. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the agent is not going to work for free. So they take a cut, which is typically 15% of what the publisher pays you, both up front and on the back end once your book is selling. So that's how they make their money. But that also means that there's an incentive for them to get you the best deal, because they make the most money if you make the most money. So that's kind of how that works. So once you have an editor that has locked in, you have a signed contract, they've agreed to publish your book, and you've agreed that they're the one to publish your book. Then the editor will have revisions for you to make. They know their genre best. They know what sells in the market. They will guide you to help make revisions on your manuscript. Then there's the actual publication process. So this is once, again, like we said at the very beginning of this presentation, your book is locked, loaded, and ready to go. Now it needs a whole bunch of other things, such as design, marketing, distribution, and et cetera. So that's kind of the publication end. Okay, so that's the whole fiction roadmap. The nonfiction is very similar, but there's a few differences because of the difference in when you write your manuscript. So you start with the book proposal that we talked about earlier. That's what you submit to your agent. So not the full manuscript, you submit the book proposal. Once you get the agent to agree that this is a great idea, I think I can sell this to a publisher, they go off, they do their work, they sell it to the publisher. Publisher agrees, you have a contract, you sign the contract, everyone's happy. That's the point at which you actually write the manuscript. The editor may or may not be involved depending what type of book you're writing during the writing process, but they will no doubt have revisions for you. So then the revision process happens right before publication, just like with fiction, and you are ready to go. I want to point out that there are a few small exceptions to this process. This is all talking about trade publishing, which is, I've never thought about how to define trade publishing. It's kind of just like all of the books that you would tend to read, and certainly all the books you would find in a store like Barnes & Noble. The exceptions are academic presses and small presses. So academic presses is something like, if you're in the New York City area, Wiley, Oxford University Press, outside of there, Elsevier, even HarperCollins sometimes. So these presses have direct submissions, and sometimes they'll even reach out to experts in sort of the scientific community or whatever academic community you're looking for to actually write the books. So that's the difference there. Of course, because the audience is so much smaller, these are usually academics writing for other academics. The contract will be smaller, there's less money to be made, etc. So that's just a difference that I want to point out. Slightly different publishing roadmap. If you have questions about that at the end, if any of you are academics looking to get published, we can certainly talk about that more. All right, in traditional publishing, there are two gatekeeping spots that prevent you from having a guaranteed published book. The first, of course, is the agent. If you can't get an agent, you won't get to a publisher, which means your book will not be published traditionally. The thing that people tend to forget, because it's so exciting to land an agent, you think your road is over, you've made it, your book is going to get published. That's not necessarily true. Just having an agent does not guarantee that any publisher will actually buy your book. And people can be out, it's called on submission. It's when your agent is submitting your book to various publishers for as short as a few months and as long as a few years. It really varies a lot. So these are kind of the two roadblocks to being published in traditional publishing. Unfortunately, the thing to note here is who you are really matters a lot. So especially if you're publishing a nonfiction book, you need to be not only an expert in your space, whatever that happens to be that you're writing about, but you also need to have a platform. Otherwise, agents and then publishers probably will not give you a great look. Okay, so this process, as you may have figured out from all the things I've said so far, requires a good amount of patience and perseverance. This part, the part all the way through to getting the agent and then getting the publisher, again, it could take months, it could take years. It just depends. And there's unfortunately no way to control that process. You're kind of leaving it up to the publishing gods, so to speak. However, you can have some guarantee of the time it will take between when the publisher has signed the contract with you and your time of publication. Assuming you turn your revisions in on time, there'll be some sort of deadline that the editor will set with you. The process between getting the revisions done and getting your book published can take about 9 months to 2 years. In traditional publishing, it really won't be shorter than 9 months. And this is the reason not everyone chooses to go this route. Again, time and speed. The reason is that a lot of stuff has to go into this period of time. There's the rewriting part with the revisions, and then after that, it goes on to a whole host of other people. There's copy editing that happens, which is kind of changing some words, moving some paragraphs, sort of line editing is what another version that it's called. There's proofreading, which is checking for errors. If you wrote a nonfiction book, there might be fact checking or some sort of historical fiction. So those are all the words related things. Then you need design, you need a cover, you need interior layout. You might need an ebook layout if it's coming out in that format, any images inside the book, there's promotion. So there's and then the book actually physically has to be printed and shipped out to the various bookstores that might carry it. So all of these things take time. There could be a delay in any one of them. So they usually add some buffer. You'll get between 9 months and 2 years. Next topic everyone likes to talk about is money. The good news about traditional publishing is the upfront investment is the publisher's responsibility. That is why they've signed this contract with you. They are betting on you and on your manuscript. So they are putting up the money to get all of this stuff done to get your book out into the world. You might get an advance. I mentioned an advance before. This is money that the publisher pays based on a prediction of how many books they think you'll sell. So let's see. So if they're going to offer you 10% of each book you sell, and they think you'll sell 100 copies, then you'll get $10 as an advance because they expect to sell 100 copies and they're going to predict that and pay you out in the beginning. If you sell more than 100 copies, you will make 10% on the additional copies once they've sold the first 100. So 101, you get 10% of that first copy, second copy after the 100. The good news about an advance is it is non-refundable. You never have to give back that money, even if you don't sell as many books as the publisher was expecting you to sell. The flip side is the royalties are, as you'll see, smaller than other types of publishing because, again, the publisher put up the money up front and they're taking on all the risk, so they get more of the reward. 10%, as I've written here, is the industry standard. It can fluctuate by a few percent, but it probably won't veer too far outside of that bracket. Creative control. So not only are you giving up the possibility of increased royalties, you are also giving up creative control of your book for the most part. The publisher has essentially purchased these things from you with this contract. And so not only are the cover, the back cover copy, the promotional materials, all these things are the publisher's responsibility, but they also kind of get the last say. a good publisher that wants to keep a good relationship with you will consult you as the author and take your input into consideration. But at the end of the day, these things that are not the actual written words on the page are really theirs to call the shots. Marketing and publicity. So this is kind of the last big bucket of consideration when you're thinking about the type of publishing route you want to go on. In traditional publishing, you kind of get out what you put in. The misnomer that I think still persists to this day, even though it's changed a lot in recent years, is that once you're done writing the book and getting a publishing contract, you no longer have to do anything. The publisher will do all of the selling, they'll do all of the promoting, and it's just not true anymore. In fact, publishers expect you to go out and help to sell your own book. Once again, the caveat is if you're a celebrity, the publisher will actually still expect you to do things. They're going to send you on tour, they're going to get you out in front of people. But they also get things like billboards and Instagram ads and, the like, and the average author is just not going to get those things. Usually your book is sold as part of a package or part of a grouping with other books that are similar. And really one of the best marketing things that a traditional publisher can give you is space on a bookshelf in, say, a Barnes and Noble. I would have said Borders, but they're out of commission now. And your local bookshop, a lot of times, it's up to you to bring your own book to their attention because they can only stock so many books in print in their store. And so if you really want to get your book in there, you need to go in, you need to make it known that this book is coming out with this publisher. So that's just one example of kind of pounding the pavement on behalf of your own book. All right, so let's just sum up really quickly. Traditional publishing advantages are prestige. A lot of people, myself included, find a lot of prestige in being traditionally published. That's really what there is to say about that. It's free. You don't have to put up any money to get this accomplished. The publisher has the expertise. This is why they're in business. They do this day in, day out. They have a whole team of people participating to get these books published. You don't have to really think about or learn how to do a lot of the things related to publishing. And there's broad distribution. Again, this is why publishers exist. They have more platforms to get your books out there. And it's not your responsibility once it's in their hands. One thing I'll note about traditional publishing before we move on is that if for some reason your book gets stuck in the agent or sort of pre-publisher before you get a contract, if it's stuck in one of those areas and it just does not seem to be moving, you can withdraw it. Like you can take your manuscript back, you can revert the copyrights to yourself, and you can go on and hybrid or self-publish, which are the next two things we're going to talk about. It doesn't work in the reverse. You can't go from having self-published a book because it's out there published. But if you haven't yet published it on the traditional track and still want to do so, you can, which is really a big value if your end goal is to have the book out there no matter what. So that was a lot of information, but it's all groundwork to talk about the last two publishing options because we're going to refer back a bunch. So the next option is hybrid publishing. As I mentioned, this is a cross between traditional and self-publishing. These are publishers. So it is an entity like a traditional publisher that its whole reason for being is to publish books. And that way it's very similar. The main difference is that the author helps to make up the upfront investment in their own book. So you are putting money down in this option. The roadmap, very similar to traditional with the exception of needing an agent, which you don't need in hybrid publishing. So now the only gatekeepers are the publisher and the publisher. You need to submit your manuscript directly to a hybrid publisher, and they will decide whether or not it's a good fit for their line, if it's up to snuff in terms of quality. A good hybrid publisher will have standards. So if you come across a publisher, on the internet, or someone tells you about one and they will publish anything that they receive, that is a version of self-publishing. Sometimes it goes by the name book packager, and that's not the same thing as hybrid publishing. So it's just something to look out for when you're out and about evaluating your options. All right, so now we're to our four other considerations. So first is time. The main advantage of hybrid publishing in comparison to traditional publishing is you get a quicker answer from the time you finish your manuscript until the time you find out if a publisher, in this case a hybrid publisher, is willing to publish it. Because of their just because of like a size situation, they can go through manuscripts much more quickly and evaluate them against their own criteria more quickly. And so they'll give you an answer more quickly. So that's a big advantage in terms of time. The revision to publication stage, again, because they act like a traditional publisher, is very similar to traditional publishing. So nine months to 2 years. Money. So both of these are different than traditional publishing. In this case, like I said, you do have to put in an upfront investment. The amount varies wildly based on publisher. So, I mean, $5,000 to $50,000 is just like, that's such a big range. And I hate to do that, but it really just depends who you're looking at, what services that you have, that they have agreed to do for you. You can kind of buy services one at a time in a way, like you can add marketing on. But on the flip side, because you're putting in some of the risk to get this out there, you get more of the royalties. So a 50% royalty rate is not uncommon. This also varies a lot based on how much money you've put in and also the model of the publisher. For example, there's one hybrid publisher out there, Morgan James, that will cover all the production costs. So kind of all of the upfront costs that you would normally be putting money into, but they require their authors to buy 2,000 copies of their own book at minimum. And so that's kind of the author's contribution and like bet on themselves. So there's a whole bunch of different models, but this is just kind of a ballpark of what you can expect. In terms of creative control, compared to traditional publishing, you get more in hybrid publishing. Because you're putting in a monetary investment, you just get more say. That's essentially what you're paying for. You could have more control over the cover, you could have more control over the title. You just get more say because you've paid for it. And the last bit is marketing publicity. This is an instance where the hybrid publisher will put your book out, it will distribute it, but if you want kind of additional promotion and marketing assistance, which they, you know, as publishers are experts in, you need to pay for that service. And so that is a difference from traditional and self-publishing. All right, so just to sum up with hybrid publishers, they are quicker in terms of getting an answer, whether or not your book will be published. You can retain more creative control because you've paid for it. So that's a plus for people that really have a very specific vision for their book. And unlike self-publishing, which we'll talk about next, you get the full publisher expertise. So they bring all of the professionals, they've vetted everyone. They are kind of helping you maintain quality control for your own book. All right, our last avenue of publishing, self-publishing. There are so many books out there now because the internet and technology have made it so much easier to self-publish. Like I said, in the back in the day, and I can't even tell you which day, but certainly prior to Amazon, who has really brought this to the masses. A self-published author was often kind of laughed at because they had to pay an exorbitant amount up front if they wanted the book to actually be bound. But some people would even, I mean, technically publishing, you could staple together a bunch of papers that you printed out at Kinko's. Like that is technically publishing if you print a bunch of copies and hand them out. Now you can produce books that are virtually indistinguishable from self-published books if you A, know what you're doing, and B, find the right people to help you do it. So I just want to mention that there are books, because I'm sure somebody will bring this up. There are books that have been self-published that have gone to the top of the New York Times bestseller list and then been picked up by traditional publishers, which the purpose of that is like, well, the traditional publisher sees a market opportunity that the self-publisher hasn't yet tapped into. This is not common. This is extremely rare. If your goal is to get traditionally published, I do not recommend doing the self-publishing route because I don't even know, I couldn't even tell you, 99.999% of books will not end up getting traditionally published. They will be self-published, the copyright is all yours, and they'll be out in the world under your name and brand. So the roadmap here is even briefer than in hybrid publishing. You do have to finish your manuscript. In this case, you need to finish your manuscript no matter what, even if you're writing nonfiction, because there's no one to submit a book proposal to. The good news is there is no gatekeeping. Self-publishing, one of the major attractions is you don't have to convince anyone. You can just put the book out there yourself. The caveat is that you're going to need to do a lot of things to get it published. So this is where you can either do it yourself if you have the skills or are willing to learn the skills, and or you can outsource a lot of this work. And this is just the main points. This isn't even all the points to publishing, but I just wanted to point out there's editing, proofreading, back cover copy, full cover design, which includes the front and back and the spine. You need to get it laid out for the print version of your book, which is kind of how it looks on the page, the font, the margins, how the paragraphs break. Then there's an ebook layout, which is something slightly different. You have to register an ISBN, which is required for all books. So there's a lot that goes into publishing, which again is in part why publishers exist, but you can do it yourself now. And so this is all the things you would need to consider. So at the end of the day, you will get published, but because all of these things are in your control, the quality is fully in your hands, which means as good as it might be or as bad as it might be, it's all on you. So what is in your hands? The first thing that's in your hands is the amount of time that this takes. This is, I'll add a caveat to this too. So this is definitely the fastest option if time is of the essence for you. With traditional and hybrid publishers, the 9 months to 2 year timeframe is just non-negotiable. Whereas in self-publishing, if you do it yourself or hire contractors and pay them appropriately, they can get it done in whatever amount of time it is that you designate. So potentially this is the fastest option. Few self-published books, once they're written and edited, take 2 years to get out to the world. The other thing that is in your hands is money. How much are you willing to invest upfront? This sometimes, I will, in my experience, say oftentimes correlate to the outcome you get and how professional your book appears and reads. But again, this is something that's in your control. No one is going to tell you exactly how much money you need to spend. That is completely on you. To the point where I guess I should mention, you could do it yourself with everything. You could just upload your Word manuscript to Amazon with some sort of cover image and bing, bang, boom, you're ready to go. I don't personally recommend it, but if your full goal is to just get the words out into the world, that will do it. The only thing you'd have to pay for is an ISBN, which is required for every published book, and that costs $125. So minimum investment, $125. The other thing that's in your hands is creative control. This time, you can pay for someone else's expertise, but you get the final say because you are now paying for literally every part of this publication process. Some people might find this overwhelming and too much, and they don't want to have anything to do with deciding, say, like what the cover looks like. And other people have such a specific vision for what they want their book to look like. This is 100% why they choose to self-publish. So definitely something to consider. And the last bit is marketing and publicity. This time it's all on you. You can pay for help. You can pay for a PR person. There are people out there whose entire expertise is getting books into the hands of bloggers and people that can help blurb them and just, helping get the word out about your book. But once again, you're going to have to pay because this is self-publishing. So that is, I think, all I'm going to say about that. I don't want to run over time. We're almost there. The last thing we want to talk about self-publishing is royalties. So we talked about upfront money. That is the money you need to invest in getting your book out there. Totally up to you. Royalties is not totally up to you because you need a platform on which to publish your book. So a retailer is the individual platform. So think Amazon KDP, that's the whole thing. It's not just Amazon. It's called Amazon KDP. That is one retailer. There is Barnes & Noble Press. There's Apple Books. So these are all individual platforms on which you can publish your book. So if you publish it on Amazon, it's not going to suddenly appear on Barnes & Noble's site or these other sites. It now is almost exclusively on Amazon. I say almost because your other option is aggregators. So when you publish on Amazon KDP, we're just going to use that as the example because it's so prevalent. You'll get approximately a 70% royalty. Depends on a few decisions you make as you publish, but it's the most royalty because you put in the most work and they didn't have to do almost any work. They are just hosting your book and printing it on demand, which also costs. But that's the royalty you're going to get on your book. With aggregators, their benefit is that they can put your book on various of these platforms. So they can put it on Amazon, but they can also put it on Barnes & Noble. They can also put it on Apple Books all at once on your behalf. And then it's in more places for you. This royalty rate is extremely variable. I just stuck one in here. Ingram Spark is one example of an aggregator. They will give you 40% royalty rate on the books that are sold through them and then through the platforms. They have to pay the platforms, and then so that's kind of why it's lower. But the positive side is you don't have to manually put it up on each one of these different platforms. Again, this is all digital. That I have to emphasize that this is all digital. All of this is happening online. This is not in brick and mortar stores. If you want a brick and mortar store to carry your self-published book, you're going to have a lot of work to do because it's hard to accomplish. Barnes and Noble almost exclusively does not carry that sort of thing. But if you have local bookstores, if you have a friend that owns a bookstore, like any of these things, you can go talk to them. You can make a deal with them. That's completely separate from what we're talking about here. All right, so to sum up self-publishing advantages, there is no gatekeeping. If you want your book published, it will be published. You get to retain complete creative control, which for some people is a real positive, and other people will want to outsource that. Totally fine. And you also have modest control over the timeline to publication. You certainly have more control than the other two publishing routes. And if you're willing to pay enough, you can retain complete control and get it published as fast as you want. Just consider the fact that when you involve other people, contractors, such as myself, in the process, you have to factor in their schedules, the amount of time it takes for them to do their jobs. So just don't expect it to be done tomorrow, because a lot of people make that mistake and then are sorely disappointed. I'm just going to show you the next slide. You don't have to, screenshot it or scribble it all down. I'm going to ask Sarah to please distribute this as kind of a sum up of all of the different publishing considerations. But I just wanted to point out that for each sort of avenue of publishing, traditional, hybrid, and self, I tried to highlight the most desirable versions so you can compare them. So for example, in self-publishing, there's no gatekeeping. However, the cost is the most minimal with traditional. So just wanted to highlight that. And I think we're good to go. I want to make sure there's enough time for questions. I'll just sort of wrap up with the fact that when you're deciding which of these routes to go on, you really want to ask why you're publishing this book. That is the number one question that you need to answer for yourself before you go down one of these paths. Because if you don't, you might end up with like a product that you're not super proud of, or you might get stuck in agent hell or whatever. And so so I just want to really drive that point home before you decide to choose between these. And I think I'm on time. I think I made it to the end. Sarah, are we there?
We are there. So please feel free to submit questions you have in the chat. And we will do our best to answer them, to have Allison answer time permitting. And we'll definitely provide resources in the recording so you can continue the conversation after today's program.
Allison, there are lots of questions coming in. That was really great. Thank you. Lots of information. So the first question that we got was from someone who asked, you mentioned that in traditional publishing, you need to be somebody, quote unquote, to publish. In hybrid publishing, can you be a quote unquote nobody to make a connection with a publisher?
Yes. I would never call anybody a nobody. So just to clarify what I said with traditional publishing, in nonfiction in particular, they most often require a platform or some expertise, some showing that you are somebody in your area. With fiction, it's not the same. It's much more. I'd say it's much more merit-based. Being somebody certainly helps, but it's more based on the merit and then making the agent connection. In hybrid publishing, they are purely dissecting the manuscript. I'm sure if you happen to be a celebrity, they'll be happy to take your book also, but it's a lot less gatekeepy in that way.
Good, thank you. Here's another one. How difficult is it to list a book on different retailer sites? Is it worth using an aggregator?
Great question. To be completely transparent, I haven't done it manually myself for my own book because I haven't yet self-published my own book. I've helped others self-publish their books, and every single one of them has opted not to go through the route of either aggregators or multiple platforms, because Amazon has such a lockhold on the market. They've all elected to just publish it on Amazon and kind of see where that takes them. So I'm really sorry that I can't answer that with more personal insight, but that's just what I've seen folks do.
This is sort of a follow-up to that, although I think it might have been asked by a different person. How does an individual build connection with publishers?
The question was, how does an individual build a connection with publishers? Well, if you're going the traditional publishing route, the people you want to build connections with are agents. Those are the folks that you're going to need to convince first, and then they are the ones that are responsible for retaining connections to the publishers. In a hybrid situation, I'm not sure that you would need a connection to various publishers. You would just need to do your research on what types of books those publishers have published. And if there are books similar to yours, then those are the ones you would want to be querying. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. If there's a follow-up, please put it in the chat and I'll try to get to it. Here's another type of question. How do you get people to support your book? And the asking says, many books say #1 New York Times bestseller. How can that be the case?
I think some people just lie, to be honest, but so number one, a lot of times please take this with a grain of salt, but my impression is that getting on the New York Times list and being #1 on that list are not the same. And a lot of people will conflate that. And sometimes it'll just say New York Times bestseller, and we all assume that means #1, but the list is rather long. And so, you could be anywhere on that list, and you could be on there for any length of time. And so it doesn't mean that you were up there for, 6 months. It could be a very short amount of time, but you can still list that, which you certainly would if you want to, get your book talked about. There was a first part of that question. How do you get your book talked about? Was that the first part?
No, the first question, this was my question. So the first question I had was, how do you get people to buy your book? What exactly did I say? How do you get people to support? Because I found when I was trying to publish that was the hardest part.
It's so hard. It's so hard no matter what route you take, to be quite honest. It requires a lot of creativity, and I've read this many times now, so I do think it's true. You really have to bang on everyone's door many, many times. So for example, if you're on Instagram and you're like, oh my gosh, I've already posted about my book 3 times. Well, not everyone saw those 3 instances. Who knows what the algorithm did? So you just have to keep hammering people, and it feels awful. I am not this kind of person. I hate being buy my book, but it's just what you have to do. You have to be your own megaphone, and then just get creative. Talk to everyone. Tell everyone that that you've written a book, and get them talking about it so they'll tell people. Word of mouth is very strong. I will say this is not totally related to books sales per se, but almost my whole business is built on word of mouth, and so it's really, you just have to tell people over and over again, which is very uncomfortable. I will be the first to say.
Okay, changing the topic a little bit. What about debuting chapters using Substack to get feedback and build an audience?
Yeah, I've heard of people doing this. I think it's great, especially to get kind of a temperature check of how your content is landing. The caution that I would offer is that when you're doing it that way, you don't necessarily know who it is that's giving you feedback. So it can be hard to know how seriously to take that feedback. A lot of times people, and that's why I use the word temperature check, people will use it as kind of a if I get, a huge mass of the same type of feedback, I can feel pretty confident that it's landing that particular way. But when you get into the nitty gritty of things, you have to be a little bit more discerning as to whether or not you want to really follow what people are directing you as, because you can get yanked around a lot. I think it's, so like I said, I think it's good for a temperature check. I think it's good to, Substacks and, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the other newsletter forum. Well, in any case, something else similar. They're good for getting readership, and that's paramount especially if you're trying to go into traditional publishing. The more kind of eyeballs you can show that you have on your stuff, the better. So So it's a really positive route. That's just my one caveat is like, be careful with all of the information you're getting back. You might not want to follow all of it.
Speaking of credibility of information, we have a question here about how do you discern the credibility and effectiveness of an agent?
Oh, that's a great question because I did forget to mention something very, very important. In traditional publishing, agents should never, ever ask you for money. If an agent asks you for money to represent your book, just run away. Absolutely do not go with that agent. That is not how this publishing model works. So that's an easy one. That's like a very obvious if they ask you for money, not credible. Otherwise, it can be really tricky. I think the number one thing is to do your homework, to look at what else they've represented, to make sure it's similar to what you want to put out there. Because if you're writing a fantasy book and this person has only done like cookbooks, they're not going to have the connections to the types of publishers and editors that you need them to have. So that's less of a credibility thing and more of a fit situation. Yeah, and otherwise, I mean, just the same way you'd look into the credibility of a doctor, you know, do they have what seems to be a credible website? Are they, if you get them on the phone, do they sound credible? Just, you know, the basics after that, but absolutely do not give them any money.
Is there any way to check, like, are there testimonials or referral avenues to check?
Yeah. So, publish, oh my gosh, I was gonna say Publishers Clearinghouse. That's not right. You know what? I'm going to add this to this is a great question, and I'm totally blanking on the name of it right now. But there is a oh, it's really bothering me that I can't think of the name of it. There is a website. It's $25 a month. You can sign in, and they announce book signings on there. So when an agent has sold a book to a publisher, this is where the announcement goes, and this is a great way to check, like, is your agent on there? What has the agent sold, and what kind of deals have they gotten? Because a lot of times they'll actually put some of the monetary divulgences in there. So I can't believe I can't think of the name of it right now, but I will add that to the material that Sarah sends out. I'm making note of that right now.
Awesome. Here, a question about money. How is 10% royalty in traditional publishing actually calculated? What is it? 10% of what?
Yes. So that is typically 10% of book sales domestically. Foreign rights are different because this gets a little in the weeds, but your book will often be sold in multiple different contracts. So 10% is typically domestic print book sales. Ebook sales can be a slightly different. Audiobook sales, there's actual audio publishers that specialize in audio. And so you could have an entirely separate contract for that. The royalty rate might be different on that. So yeah, so 10% of print books, that's where that number comes from.
Oh, okay. The questions are coming in fast and furiously, Allison, so I'll try to keep up with them.
No problem.
Between traditional publishing versus hybrid versus self-publishing, what level of protection do hybrid self-publishers have regarding piracy, copyright laws, getting their work fit into AI, etc.?
Well, I can't speak to AI. I don't know that they have any more or less than anybody else, because the way all of this, I'm assuming this is talking about ebooks. Usually print books are not, no one's nearly as concerned about kind of the copyright or piracy of those things. The reason to publish through a reputable publisher, whether or not that's a hybrid publisher or one of these retailers that you do through self-publishing, is because they are offering the same protections as they're offering traditional publishers. Like your Amazon Kindle book is protected exactly the same, whether or not you choose to publish it yourself or whether or not, you know, Random House published this Kindle ebook. So in that regard, there's no more and no less. However, that said, if you put it on kind of a random website or whatever that could be scraped, that is, you know, you could call that self-publishing. Or if you send your own ebook out, like if you email it to people with no added protection, no like what do they call it? Like a license attached to it, that can be distributed. That's much less protected. So there's just like mistakes you can make to protect it less. But when it comes to the actual publishing platforms, everything has pretty equal protection.
Two similar questions from different people. One is, can you provide names of other self-publishers, and what are some examples of hybrid publishers? How do you find the one that publishes my type of work?
Let me go back. Let me go back really quickly to the hybrid publishing slide. I didn't want to take up people's time too much, but there's a couple noteworthy or like larger hybrid publishers that I do have the names of. So if you want to jot these down, there's Greenleaf Book Group. So Greenleaf, like leaves on the trees book group. There's a publisher called Morgan James. I think that was the one that requires you to purchase the 2,000 copies of your book, but they pay for all of the publication costs or the production costs. There's Amplify Publishing and She Writes Press. So writes as in writes with a pen. So those are kind of the four that are probably the most well known. If you do a Google search for hybrid publishers, their names come up a lot. That was one part. Oh, and how to find ones that are a good fit for your book. Once again, it's such manual labor, and I hate to say that, but you have to look at what else they've published. Some hybrid or self-publishers, ones where you pay the whole kit and caboodle, they will specialize. Like some are really good with nonfiction, some are really good with sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative fiction. So the best idea is to like get a list and from Google, start with these ones, see what they've already put out, and then see if your book fits into that venue.
Are there other names of self-publishers that you can provide too, Allison?
You know, it's interesting. I can like do a little bit of research. I haven't done a whole lot of self-publishing with the full like packager. I'll call it a packager to distinguish it. I've mostly worked with collectives of freelancers who have helped someone bring their book to market, which is kind of a whole other side of things. You can hire one entity, a self-publisher, to kind of do all of that for you, and you have one point of contact kind of, and that's a big benefit there. Or you can kind of cobble it together yourself, hire your own editor, hire your own designer, and so forth. And that's what I've mostly worked as part of. So let me look into it. I'll jot that down too. See if there's any names that pop up. I know I have one client who did end up going with a self-publishing packager. So I'll get you a couple names.
Thank you. What would be the process for publishing and reaching out to an agent, or would the process for publishing and reaching out to an agent be different if someone is both the author and illustrator of a children's picture book?
No. That's an easy answer. No, the process would be exactly the same. And in fact, it might be a little bit easier because there's less negotiation since there's only one of you rather than two of you.
That's great. That's okay. That one place where it's easier. How many books must be sold in order to be considered a New York Times bestseller?
I don't know the answer to that. I do not know the answer to that question. That's a great question. Sorry.
It's like guessing the number of jelly beans in a jar at a carnival. What services does Gold Standard provide?
Oh, thank you for asking. So I provide writing, editing, and book coaching services. So just to sort of give you the high level, on the writing side, I've done ghostwriting for individuals. A lot of times it's like C-suite folks who just don't have time to write their own communications for marketing or sometimes books. Sometimes they want to publish a whole book. So ghostwriting, to be clear, is where I write it, but my name is nowhere on the product. So it's their property. They go out, it's their ideas, obviously. Then I also do copywriting for various businesses. So that might be press releases, emails, kind of the stuff that keeps the marketing department going. And then on the editing side, I work mostly with individual authors on books or sometimes articles. I come from the world of academic publishing. I worked for Wiley for a little under 7 years. And so I'm very familiar with journal articles and kind of the things that academics have to write. So I work with a lot of those. And then, so writing coaching is essentially if you want to do the writing, But you need some guidance and some accountability and some support and some eyes to like look at it and make sure you're on the right track. That's kind of what that is. And I've worked with both nonfiction and fiction authors on getting their books written. So
Thank you.
sure.
Couple of questions related to NDA, and they're a little bit related, so I'll ask them both at once. As a self-publisher, should you have everyone you speak with regarding your book sign an NDA or contract when considering them for services? And then the second one we got was, when considering self-publication for a fiction book, how does one get an illustrator? Would you have them sign an NDA? So kind of related.
Yeah. So this is my personal opinion. I am not a lawyer in any stretch of the imagination, but based on what I've seen clients do, there's really no need for an NDA because you own the copyright to your book. Copyright comes down to like you want to get it, you can get it copyrighted, but once it's published, it's yours. You were first to market, so to speak. And if any dispute ever came up, so long as you can prove that you own the original of whatever it is, the book, the children's book, the illustrations, the court, my understanding is the court will rule in your favor and the copyright is yours. So I've always found NDAs to be unnecessary. That said, if you're considering working with someone and you feel any sense of unease, one way to weed them out could be to ask them to sign an NDA. And if they're not willing, then it's just like, there's no reason not to sign one as a contractor. I would happily sign one if you hired me. So it's really more of a weed out process than anything else. Oh, and the illustration. I am so far out of the writing and illustrating space that I don't really want to comment on that because I don't know enough about how the writers and illustrators work together. But I would be surprised if an NDA is necessary in that, especially if they're not if you hire them to do the illustrations, it's kind of the same answer. Nice to have if you feel the need, but not necessary from my viewpoint.
We're going to sneak in one more question because it's
Awesome.
almost 1 o'clock and we want to be mindful of everyone's time.
Absolutely.
In terms of the demand for medium to low content books, such as guided journals, health planners, etc., what is the most effective way to conduct research or surveys?
Oh my goodness. I think this is really a great question for an organizational psychologist. I've never done that. I've edited, if you've ever used Oprah's book guides, I've worked on those, but I don't know. That's such an interesting question. I wish I had the answer. I really don't know how you would go about doing that. But I think if you want to find out more, I've done work with organizational psychologists and their whole job is to create surveys that will give you useful and meaningful feedback. So if you're at an institution, just go look for organizational psychology and maybe you'll find someone that can help you.
Well, that's great because at least it's a place to go look to see. It gives us the idea of who to
Who
contact.
does that?
Yeah, exactly. Who's the expert in that? Allison, I'm going to turn this back over to Shirley, I think, to wrap us up. But thank you so much for all your incredible expertise.
Absolutely. These were all great questions. So thanks for wrapping up, Shirley.
I don't know why I'm not visible. You can only see my painting.
It's a beautiful painting.
Thank you. But I'm sitting right. Oh, I know why. I covered magic. Anyway, Allison, that is phenomenal. I have not learned with avid interest in this short 55 minutes. It's so intriguing, and you have delivered such cogent information in such a systematic, organized manner. I thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure.